Hello, everyone. Welcome to this next episode of the podcast, The Circle of Hope. My name is Valerie Hope. I am your host. And this is a podcast that brings people together from my own circle so that we can explore conversations around building connections with people that help us thrive and grow. And man, grow is actually the probably the operative word for this episode. I have invited my dear friend Connie Laufersky to the podcast today. Connie and I, gosh, Connie, you and I have known each other almost 10 years
I think a
ish.
little over 10 years now.
Over
Yeah.
10 years?
Yeah.
My goodness.
We
Um,
moved to Dallas in 2015. So we're in the 10-year area.
okay, yeah, 10-year area because you and I met at church and I
Yes.
started going to that church in 2015. And
Huh.
so it was like the summer of
Yep.
2015. So at some point there,
Same.
but I don't think we actually connected until there
Hmm.
was something. You'll have to fill in the blank here for me, but I remember we were either sitting next to each other or
Hmm.
sitting very close to one another, and there was a moment in the service where I don't know, were we supposed to like hold hands or there's something happened?
I was having a particularly emotional experience that day. I had something major going on in my job. I was a Montessori school leader, and there was something happening that I hadn't faced before, and it was really touching me in a deep way. And so I was feeling very vulnerable and emotional, and you just scooched on over and offered me a hug, and that was the beginning of this beautiful journey we've been on.
I'm so glad I did that. And you know what's so
Me too.
funny is that if this was around 2015, 2016,
Hmm.
I if we'd met a year earlier, I don't think I would
Hmm.
have ever done that.
Hmm.
Because
Yep.
I'd done some like major self-development and personal development work that year.
Hmm.
And expressing my love to people was the area that became really evident that I needed to work on. We were
Hmm.
just not a family that was raised saying I love you, and being
Mm.
touchy-feely always felt like little ick to me.
Mm. Yeah.
And so, but I realized that I really loved being, connected with people and showing affection and showing my love. But it's just something that I was so uncomfortable with because I wasn't accustomed
Yeah.
to it that I would shy away from those moments. So unless somebody initiated, I wouldn't reciprocate. I would definitely
Yeah.
not initiate. But because
Mm.
I'd done some of that work, you were the beneficiary.
Thank goodness. Like I so deeply needed it in that moment, and then it was the beginning of this really wonderful relationship that we've cultivated.
Yeah, because I mean, ever since then, I think we probably had a brief conversation then, but
Hmm.
every Sunday after that, when we see each other, we connect and we talk. And I think when
Yep.
I heard you were a Montessori teacher, I was like, oh, this is
Yes.
everything. I love Montessori. I've never been a Montessori student, but there's just the concept of
Hmm.
Montessori I've been enamored with. But we have met every month for
Hmm.
years now. Uh,
Yes.
more than yeah, I don't think we rarely miss, if ever.
True.
If we
Yes.
do miss, we are like very conscientious about scheduling it for the one after. But
Hmm.
and I'd love for people to hear this because I think it's I know I have in my life in my earlier years underestimated the power of just having a you're like a steady
Yes.
I I'm missing words right now to
Hmm.
express just how much peace and
Hmm.
grounding and calm, but also very challenging, uh,
Hmm.
but in a loving, caring way, not in
Yes.
a critical way. But
Yes.
you have provided so many emotional touchstones for me over the last, almost 10 years that we've known
Yes.
each other. I don't take for granted that that's something that we had to cultivate.
Hmm.
Did it happen immediately? I don't remember it happening immediately, but I know we dove
Yeah.
into a very intimate space because of that first moment, right?
Yes.
But what do
Yes.
you remember about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, the word that comes to mind for me about our relationship is intentionality, that we've been
Yes.
very intentional about being present for each other, even like in those moments when we are together, which is usually like a lunch or a dinner that, is meant to be an hour and turns out to be, 2 or 3, sometimes we just have to stop ourselves and like,
We
okay,
have to
until
go
next time.
home.
But just the power of intentionality. And I mean, I have some wonderful friendships and relationships that are more spontaneous in nature. We might go months without talking to each other. And the difference in those relationships and this one of just like, like knowing there's that constant, and you're right, we challenge each other. It's not we're not sitting around with a cup of tea, talking about the weather, right?
Handing
Usually
ourselves
when
through
we
menopause.
I am grateful to say those days are over for me, and I have empathy for the fact that, you're revisiting them right now. So,
Every once in a while they show up.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so
yeah,
the power of intentionality and
so true.
the depth that that brings to a
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah, and I would even say we do have a cup of coffee and have I want to say there's lightness in our connection.
True. Yes.
There's not a okay, we're here to work, we're
Yeah.
okay, we've got something deep going on. I think we have been able to dip in and out of
Hmm.
really light situations where we can laugh and be joyful and express some
Hmm.
silliness, but also moments where this I know when I have a conversation scheduled coming up, like, oh, you know what, I think Connie would be a great person to bounce off
Yeah.
some ideas that I have, or this challenge that I have, whether that's a professional one, a spiritual one, a
Hmm.
personal, relationship stuff, money. Like we have
Yes.
tapped into everything. And I
Yeah.
want to say, because I not to not take for granted that you and I don't know each other's families that well. I mean,
Oh,
you know my brother
yep.
because he used to work with you at your
Yes.
school,
Yep.
but have I met your husband Brian? Maybe
Once at
once?
church. Yep. One New
Yeah,
Year's
like
Eve
once. I don't know
celebration.
anything
Yes.
else other
Which
than
is
what
when
you
I met
shared
your
with
mom
me.
too. Yeah.
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 It's just very so our relationship is kind of insular in that way,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, and you
We're
were
in
my
our
brother's
happy little
boss.
bubble.
Um, so because I'd love for people that are here are listening and watching this to get what what created that. I mean, we talked a little bit about
Hmm.
how we first met, but how does one nurture from your point of view, either
Yeah.
about our relationship or about others that you have that are this intentional? How does one nurture to get to this type of to have this level
Hmm.
of relationship, you think?
Hmm. Well, I do think it requires a level of safety, like emotional safety, for
Mm,
me at least. And
same.
this might be different for different people, but for me, like that moment, when you kind of slid over in the pew and wrapped your arms around me, like that was like, oh, this is a safe person to be around.
Mm,
I can be in this emotional state with this person.
mm,
There were no words involved other than you asked if you could give me a hug. And,
mm,
but there was not a conversation involved. It was
right.
pure love and emotional safety. And so for me, that was the groundwork for then how, who knew in that moment it would evolve into this. And
Yeah.
so, but it was the catalyst for, the depth and the consistency and the intentionality in our
Mm.
relationship.
And want to come back to this idea of emotional safety, right? The
Hmm.
psychological and emotional safety
Yeah.
is something that is also nurtured even over the years because
Yes.
and you do this really well. I hope I do this. Maybe I don't do it as
Hmm.
intentionally as you do, but anytime I have something, especially something that you notice is a bit challenging for me, I'm having a hard
Hmm.
time with it, something that's frustrating or whatever heightened emotion I'm having about it, you listen, right? You create some space to listen, allow me to just pour out whatever needs to be poured out, and then you generally ask me, would you like to have some
Hmm.
reflections about this? Would you like me to give you some insights and my advice? Or you always ask for permission for how to proceed
Hmm.
if we were needing to proceed, right? Which
Hmm.
then gives me the choice to
Hmm.
just continue or to ask for what I need. Well, tell
Mm.
me about what has you do that? Where'd you get that? How did you know that that's
That's
appropriate
a
to do?
great question. I think that really was cultivated for me in my Montessori practice.
Mm,
That as Montessori educators, really early on, we are taught to ask permission of the child. And so, it is a educational method that is deeply grounded in respect and, understanding that children are human beings for whom, they need the adults to guide them and
mm,
not necessarily, there's a difference between guiding and teaching, like that idea
mm,
of like, as a teacher, I'm there to put things into a child's brain. And in the Montessori method, it's the other way around. It's as a guide, we are there to, draw things out and make connections for the child. And so I think it over the years has become more natural for me to ask that permission. It's usually in the form of, are you looking for feedback or are you really looking for a place to vent? And both of those things are have their place. Like there's times
yeah,
when I just need to vent, need
sure,
to get it all out. And so often, when that space is created, we can come up with our own answers
yeah.
versus, needing to get answers from somebody else.
Yeah. Oh, it's been super helpful. I think there are times when, yeah, venting for me is, yeah, great. But usually by the time I share it with other people is, okay, I'm done with the venting or I'm done
Yeah.
feeling this way. I need some coaching or I need some
Mm-hmm.
perspective from a different point of view. And
Mm-hmm.
and you're so good at providing that too. I wonder, and there's there's a slight difference in generation, if you will, and not a huge
Mm-hmm.
one
Yeah.
between us. But I wonder, you mentioned with children, you're taught that you're guiding them and you're asking them, you're giving them agency.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a boss, like in your case, you were a
Mm-hmm.
director of Montessori school for a long time, you obviously
Mm-hmm.
worked with other professionals. What does that look like when you're either mentoring someone, when you're managing someone?
Yes.
How does that agency show up?
hmm I mean, very similarly, and yes, I mean, like, of course, there are times when you have to put the boss hat on, and
Yeah.
that those were not my favorite times, to be honest with you. I knew that those times would exist, and they did exist. But often, I really hoped as a leader, and it would be interesting to, go back to some of the individuals that I've led and asked that question, but I do hope that as a leader, I modeled for them what we are taught to do as guides for our students and teachers for our students.
Okay.
And I do like if we use our relationship as an example, and oftentimes, I might ask you a couple of questions. You're coming up with your own answers, or like
Yeah.
I might give you an insight, like, yeah, no, that's not quite the right fit for me. It feels more like this.
Mm,
And that really is grounded, and I know we have this in common in the, nonviolent communication model
right.
of, listening, reflecting back what you think you're hearing, allowing that person to affirm, yep, that's it, or like, nope, not quite it. But by offering back what you think you're hearing, it gives the person, who you're holding space for to like reflect. Okay, nope, that's not quite it yet. And
Yeah.
and again, still come up with their own answers instead of, feeling like I have all the right answers.
I need to teach
Um,
you everything. Let me share my
Absolutely.
wisdom.
Yeah.
I
But
do feel that
there
way
definitely
sometimes.
are times, as a director of a school, whether it was teachers or parents or, at times
Yeah.
students, where there is an authority component to that role
Mm.
that, I have to or had to. I am retired from that business, but where I had to, because it was what was best for the school,
Mhm.
put on the boss hat.
Yeah.
And thankfully, was very well trained in how to do that. And
Hmm.
also, I've reflected a lot in anticipation of recording the podcast of like, okay, who are my circle of influencers? Like, who are my
Hmm.
go-to people? And, I've just been really fortunate to, and really open to,
Yeah.
people who are aligned with my, not just my thinking, but also my perspective. Like, I think we have this in common as well, highly spiritual person.
Mhm.
Um, rely a lot on, those kind of my spiritual guides as inspiration. And so when I'm looking for that kind of support, I'm looking for those, things in those people. And so, it's a great opportunity, when I was in those situations where like, okay, I got to do a boss thing right now. I usually was reaching out to somebody or some people who I
Mm,
knew that I felt did this particularly well
yeah.
and or have a similar, because, some people, are really strong in the boss role, maybe not as strong in the relational component.
Mm,
Um, those were usually not the people that I was seeking guidance from. Like, I would seek guidance intentionally from somebody who I knew had a similar kind of,
yeah.
spirit about them.
Yeah, I'm 100% where you are when it comes to that. And I think one of the reasons that also helped our bond is not only did we have this spiritual alignment, right?
Hmm.
Although there's, we look at things sometimes from different perspectives, even spiritually, but we also
Hmm.
had this very professional, very robust, very strategic minded
Hmm.
life, right? Where we spent a lot of time, me as a coach and an educator of professionals, and you,
Hmm.
Montessori director, but also this how to balance, because one of the areas that I've always been working on is being too spiritual in my work and being or too
Yes.
corporate in my work and being too spiritual in my corporate life, like having
Hmm.
having to balance those two. And I really appreciated that you had experience and a breadth of knowledge and comfort in both. And so for me, it was easy
Hmm.
to say, okay, I have this stuff coming up at work, but knowing that you would also have a spiritual
Yeah.
foundation
Yeah.
to in our, for our conversations. I wonder though, when we think about finding people who are, we say, like-minded, let's call it,
Hmm.
um, what if somebody said, well, maybe that doesn't give you a really full perspective. If we're so
Hmm.
like-minded, we don't really see,
Hmm.
especially when we're dealing with situations with people who may not have some of the same
Yes.
background or
Yes.
values. How do
Yeah.
you manage connections there?
Hmm. Well, so, a really good example that comes up for me around that is, during the pandemic, right? Like
Mhm,
school leaders were all facing very similar things, depending on states and different rules of the states. And
mhm,
so, like, one of the first things I did is I just reached out to all the different school leaders that I knew and said, hey, let's form a group. And at first, we met weekly on Zoom. And then, over time, we, met monthly, or, kind of pulled that back gradually to monthly. And there were all sorts of different leadership styles in that group. And
okay.
it was beautiful in that regard because somebody would come in with a problem, and it was often a problem like, one of my teachers went to a concert last weekend, even though we had a rule about, and what am I
Yeah,
going to do?
the shelter in
And
place thing and mhm,
yeah, all the, just all the things. And so, um, it was really beautiful that that person could get perspective from five or six other people who
ah,
often had very different points of view about how to handle it. But then it allowed that person to try on which point of view or which combination of points of view most fit for them. And
mhm,
so, there is absolutely a value in that. And I will say, I had a wonderful mentor in my Montessori experience who often pointed that out, especially like when you drill it down to co-teaching in a classroom with somebody. And I was, of course, favoring, like whenever I had a co-teacher who was like me, like, oh, hallelujah, this is so great. And she was always really wonderful at like, well, you know, and to keep this in mind when you're working with somebody who isn't like you, you're
Yeah.
better able to meet the needs of the students and the families because not
Mm,
everybody thinks like you or
mm,
feels like you or thinks, this approach is the approach. And so it was a really wonderful opportunity for me 20 plus years ago to
Yeah.
just remember that it's more than everything in life is more than what my perspective is or what my
Right.
style is. Or, we were
Yeah.
talking, before we got started about like, the almost that cognitive shift that we have to make of
Mhm.
like, well, yes, of course, this should be this way. And instead of like, oh, well, maybe I need to be looking at this a little differently.
Not in everyone's
So,
universe.
yes, well, and that, that's the beauty of living in a very diverse world is that
Mhm.
we get these opportunities to expand ourselves. And so, as long
Yeah.
as we're open to expansion, not everybody is open to expansion.
Yeah, open, ready, even
Mm-hmm.
needed. I
Mm-hmm.
talk often to leaders that it's not about finding the right way to do something. There's so many right ways. The the
Absolutely.
the the hope that I have is that people become very flexible so they can choose a
Mm-hmm.
myriad of ways, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if we're very close, like you said, and we
Mm-hmm.
only find people that think like us or look like us or behave like us or are in the same field as us, then we don't always have the opportunity to choose as broadly, right? Our
Yes.
options are limited. And so I was like, yeah, work on our range. I want to work on my range so
Mm-hmm.
that I can take in and be
Yes.
able to select. Like you created what you're saying is that that group of teachers or directors provided a range for
Yes.
whoever had a challenge or an issue or goal, and they
Yes.
could then see the range and then feel out which one was the area or
Yes.
the best
Yes.
course to take.
Well, and
Fascinating.
we fall into this trap a little bit in education because, we value education. We, especially as school leaders, we make sure that, if we don't know something, we go and learn it so we can do our jobs well. And the pandemic offered us this very rare opportunity, like
Mm,
none of us knew what to do.
mm,
So we were all like, ooh, we weren't trained. Nobody ever taught us how to do this. There's no class I can take or a book I can read on how to do this.
mm, mm,
Most of the world didn't know what to do, so we were all, kind of figuring it out as we went. And so it made this group was vulnerable in a unique way as school
mm,
leaders, where, separate from that issue, we were all quite confident in our roles
mm,
and,
yeah,
knew we knew how to do it. And, all at different, stages on our trajectory of,
yeah.
school leadership. I'd been a leader for about 7 years at that point, and so, was feeling pretty confident until the pandemic rolled around. And then all of a sudden it's like, I have no idea how to do
Ah,
this,
what do we do now?
Well, and the other thing that I did in that situation that I thought served our school population so well, and I'd forgotten about it till this moment. I also, allowed the faculty and staff to participate in our plans for how we planned to reopen that
Mm,
first fall. And they didn't have to do it. It was voluntary. So over the summer, so of course, shutdown was March 2020. Everybody was shut down and working remotely. Remotely is not the ideal in the Montessori world,
mm,
but so I offered a stipend, and anybody who wanted to be a part of making, putting the processes in place. And I would say about 80% of the faculty and staff
really?
partook. Um, and it was really beautiful. And I identified different areas and they got to choose which areas they participated in. I had a leadership team. We each took different teams.
Mm,
It was a very Montessori approach to things. And so, but the beauty behind that was then when we started up again in the fall, we actually started early that year. We started in the summer.
yeah,
But when we did start up, there wasn't a lot of like pushback or even questioning
yeah,
about what we were doing because they'd been a part of it. And if
yeah.
they hadn't been a part of it, their co-teacher was probably a part of it. Or, there
Mm,
was enough support in the team that they were really supporting each other in the process and therefore much better able to support our families and our students. And so, that kind of empowering people to be a part
yeah.
of the process when there's a problem to solve and the really beautiful ripple effects of that.
Yeah. Was that one of the ideas that came from this group of leaders that you were meeting with? Where'd that come
No,
from?
it actually, one of the things, I'm I'm a learner, hungry for information kind of
Yeah.
person. And so when the shutdown first happened, I immediately knew like, okay, this could be very problematic for schools, right?
Mm,
Like schools who don't really embrace this as an opportunity to change things it's going to be challenging for them to
mm,
survive something like this.
mm.
And so I found a book, and it was an author that I'd known. I think it's called Courage to Change,
Okay.
but I might have to circle back to you on the title of
Mm,
that book. Um, it's written by yeah, I'm blanking on all of it right now. But it's basically, it told the story of Southwest Airlines and how Southwest
mm.
decades ago, Southwest is in a different place today than then, but
Yeah.
was really considered the innovator in aviation
Yeah.
and how they did that. And part of what the book really proposed was you have to be open to change. You have to be willing to hear from everybody
Yeah.
about, what it is that, needs to change.
Yeah.
And you have to enter into it with a learner's mind, like don't
Yeah.
go into it thinking you already know how to do this. Instead, go
Hmm.
into it with this openness of like, this is going to change us. It's going to change the
Yeah.
way we do things. How it's going to change us, we don't yet know. And so, it's kind of back to that we, talked about before starting the recording for the podcast of, okay, surrendering, when
Yeah.
something big is going on, what you really want to do is clamp down, but instead surrender. And when you surrender, these beautiful things happen. And so it just
Yeah.
kind of naturally came out of that. And of course, because I am a Montessori educator and that is how we do things in the classroom, when I got to that, like, okay, I have to, I got to let go, need to, bring all of the stakeholders into this process.
Yeah.
And once I did that, with guidance, right? And I think that's the piece that I know after so many years in education, right? You can't just say, yeah, yeah, come on in, help me, and not give structure to that process. So it was a very structured approach, but also a very, we can
Inclusive.
help each other in this really. And, we all navigated those days. There was some really real darkness to that
Mhm.
experience. And so it was an opportunity to come together and lift each other up and really, help at least this is true for me, and I don't know if it's true for you, but anytime I'm going through something hard, I find when I help somebody else, I feel better,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so that was definitely like, oh, we're helping each other. This feels good. It was a balm to a lot of our weary souls.
That's so important. Yeah, I love that that piece of advice when things feel
Mm.
hard or we can't find a way, give. Just give to
Yes,
someone else.
yes.
Give to someone that
Yep,
doesn't have it. Give to someone that can, where you can exchange even. Or yeah,
yep,
that's
yep.
huge. That's
Take
huge.
food down to the food bank, donate
Yeah.
money, go and like shovel somebody's walk in the winter or
Yeah.
rake their leaves or,
Yeah.
any of those things. It's that selflessness can
Mm.
heal those, wounded parts of us.
Mm. I also see it as then this happened to me when I first started my business actually, and I know you're on an entrepreneurial path, you're in an era of
Hmm.
entrepreneurship.
Hmm. Yes.
When I started my business, I remember because I was doing something somewhat similar to what I was doing in my
Hmm.
paid corporate job, that when I left, I was like, I don't how do I structure my fees so that
Yes.
I get compensated appropriately now that
Hmm.
it's not all built
Hmm.
into the salary? How do I parse
Hmm.
all these elements of my skill set out?
Yeah.
Um, and I was kind of tentative about it. So I was like, I don't know, it feels weird, and I don't really know exactly how to go about, connecting. And but in the meantime, I also had to remind myself that the skill set that I had was one of high value. And the way I did
Yes.
that was actually mentoring. So I was coaching and
Mm.
doing public speaking
Hmm.
with young
Hmm.
people. I went to volunteer for an organization, the Eagle Scholars Organization here in Dallas, a college readiness program where I could do exactly what I love doing. And it felt like once
Yes.
I got that, I was like, yes, I am good at this. And my
Yes.
goodness, I feel like the little gremlins in my head that was
Hmm.
creating some dissonance about like whether or not this was going to be a great way for me to build a business, or the tools and the skill sets that are sufficient for it
Yeah.
started to like go away. In fact, another volunteer seeing me in my element was the one that gave me one of my first paid gigs.
Oh, nice.
Right? He's like,
Yeah.
there's somebody that could use this skill and they'll pay you for it. Can I make an introduction? I was like, oh my gosh. So
Hmm.
yes, I can't say enough how important it is, I think, to find an outlet, right? Whether that's because it heals or it
Yes.
helps you see a value for yourself.
Yes.
I think that's so, so huge.
Yeah.
Um, I want to shift a little bit here, because one thing I also know and admire about you is how devoted you are as a parent,
Mhm.
and the connection, the deep connection that you also have formed with your daughters, right? With
Mhm.
your kids and your stepchildren. So
Mhm.
I'm curious about how, when you consider them, this idea of the circle and how you to nurture and helping them thrive and grow, what's your relationship like with them, and how did you
Yeah.
nurture that?
Such a good question. So, of course, my daughters have been a part of my life for 37 plus years
Mm.
now. And certainly there's been evolution to those relationships, right? Like, there's ebbs and flows like in every relationship. I do credit my Montessori training with
Mm.
educating me in parenting skills that are empowering and based on
Wow.
respect. And so I feel really grateful that I had that experience to bring into my relationship with my children. And I will say, like, I'll say this of my birth daughters, and then I would actually say the same of my stepsons, but I feel like I just won the lotto with our kids. We got
Yeah.
great kids. And so, and I always felt that way. Our daughters were um, not challenging, children to raise. At least I didn't perceive it that way. And, that could have been my mindset. Who knows how that all evolves. My mom always used to say, when I would say there's like, well, they had really good parenting too, Connie. I'm like, I get that. But, I don't want to take credit for who they are as individuals and
Mm.
people on this planet. And they're just really cool people, excuse me, as are our stepsons. And so, we're just really fortunate in that way that
Yeah.
and we've had to change, and that's not always easy as a parent, excuse me. um you
You
know
need to take a
you
sip?
have a
I'll take a sip with you if you
okay,
need one.
good,
Yeah, we'll do
cheers.
that so you don't feel self-conscious. Mm, of
Thank you for that. um
course.
that relationship, like all relationships, had to change. Like, I like to say I'm still a parent, but I'm a different, I have to be different now as a parent than when, they were in our home relying on us to,
Sure.
get them up to adulthood. So,
Mm,
um, the one of the things that I learned in Montessori philosophy is that human development, it starts at birth, it actually starts prenatally, but that it also goes on to the age of 24. We tend to, in this culture in particular, see 18 as, okay, they're done. Out you go. And not that they wanted our input from 18 to 25, but they still got it. And
yeah.
so, and so, just recognizing like, okay, yeah, they are grown, and yes, they're going off to college and they're building their own lives, and they're not done with us and we're not done with them
Hmm.
yet. And
Hmm.
so now I hope, and it would be really interesting to ask each of them, because they are four very unique and really intriguing and inspiring individuals.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to ask them now, if we've been successful at, having relationships with them that are similar to what, you and I described at the opening of this podcast,
Hmm.
where, we can listen,
Yeah.
reflect back what we're hearing. I definitely have a mama bear sensitivity. So when one of my kids is hurting, I can swing into that reactive, like, uh-uh.
Well,
Don't
let's
hurt the
get
baby. What are you doing?
it.
And so I get the opportunity to work
Yeah.
on that quite
Yeah.
regularly.
Yeah.
I'm not as detached with them as I am with, other relationships in my life. But
I
um,
feel you. I'm the same.
right?
I don't have children, but I'm very attached to my family, to my nieces and nephews, to my
Yes,
parents. I'm trying to
yes.
raise my parents too.
Yeah, right. It gets those feathers on our back get ruffled up pretty easily. So yeah, so but being willing and open to them changing and growing. And there have been times where we've just had to, kind of the same as we talked about before, surrender, let go. Um, there's, windows of time when they're perhaps less communicative with us. And, I started this habit in the pandemic, not just with our kids, but with friends too, where I would just text and say, just want you to know I'm thinking about you. You don't need to
Yeah.
respond. Just know I love you. And that was it. And have zero expectation for a response. Sometimes I would get one, sometimes not, maybe more times often not. But, just, to let them know, like, hey, yep, you're taking space. That's cool. I'm good with that. And I love you. And
Mhm,
I'm here
mhm.
when you're ready to connect. And that's not an easy place to come to as a
Yeah.
parent, like when you're like, at least for me, my parenting was very um, reliant on a connection that's affirmed, in a pretty
Um,
regular way. And so getting to the point of, like if I send a text that did need a response and didn't get one, and then, I can either, in that moment, I can either take that personally and
mm,
get upset, and there were probably times when I did that. Or I can give them the benefit of the doubt,
yeah.
and they might be busy. They might need some space from me right now, and
Mm,
be okay with that. And the myriad of other possibilities between those two
mm.
things, and be okay with that, and not feel like I have to. Um, Oh, I remember when my oldest, she was the first to go off to college,
Uh-huh.
and and she was ready to have some space from her
Yeah.
mother, and understandably so, aren't we all when we go to college?
Mm.
And I would call her and she wouldn't call me back for like a week. And
Oof.
after a week, the first time she didn't call me back, I'm like, look, here's the thing. You have to call me back within, a certain period of time. You don't have to talk to me for a long time. I just need to know you're alive and well. And this
Alive.
was
Yeah.
before, I mean, we definitely had cell phones, but texting wasn't, the first
Mm.
place to go for communication back then. So, it's almost 20 years ago now. Hard to imagine. But,
Yeah.
today I would probably handle that differently than I did then,
Well, how would
but
you handle it today?
probably, similarly to like, okay, I called, she didn't respond, I can just let her know I'm thinking about her,
Okay.
and trust that, because the mama bear worry that creeps in is like, all
Mm.
right, she's passed out somewhere and nobody, like,
Um,
what if she needs my help? I'm her mother, know. She did not need my help. She did not want my help.
no,
She wanted to have her freshman college experience.
that's
And
so
so,
interesting.
those kinds of things, where I reflect back, like, yeah, I could have done that differently. Hindsight's always 2020 in all relationships. So, um, but we both are, my husband and I both are just delighted with our relationships with all four of our adult
Excellent.
kids, with our two grandkids. There are times when we have to hold each other up, when like if we
Mm.
have sent a text and haven't gotten a response, or have, whatever the case might be, it's
Mm.
like, yep, let's not read anything into this. Let's
Right.
just give them space. And we also approach parenting at this stage as, we want to be supportive. And
Yeah.
so I do try to ask that question, like, what's the most supportive thing I can do for you right now?
Mm.
Instead of assuming I know what it is.
Yeah.
Where when they were kids, I probably could get a better idea of what I knew it was they needed. But as adults, they need different things from
Different.
us. And if we don't
Hmm.
ask, how will we know? And we
Yeah.
will probably bungle it if we don't ask. And so
Mm.
we try to ask that question as often as
Yeah.
possible.
I'm gonna take this clip and send it to my parents so they know. Please ask. Although, I was raised And I don't know, I guess my brothers would probably say the same. We were all very independent. Our parents gave us a lot of agency, a lot of autonomy. In fact, this is what made me so like a lone ranger in so many areas
Yeah.
of my life. Like, oh, I can do anything I want. So I've done it. I can do it all myself. I can set up my own business. I
Mhm.
can travel the world. Like there are all these elements that have made me incredibly strong. The challenge I found for me was when I did need help, when I did
Yes.
need support, is feeling comfortable enough to ask for it, or feeling that
Mhm.
I had enough trust in the other person's ability and capability to support me.
Yeah.
That's always been the area where I've been the most like, I don't know if you can handle this.
Yes.
I can't
Yes.
handle it.
Right.
It's going to be harder for you because I am so good at handling myself. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yes, I think it's interesting. And I know that my mom and I call my mom almost every day. You know, I'm lucky to
Mm.
have a great relationship with her, and we talk about all
Mhm.
kinds of things. She really knows the day and day in, day outs of my life
Mhm.
mostly. My dad once a week. It's a little
Mhm.
different dynamic with him, but my brothers, though, don't seem to have that regularity of conversation. So I'm usually the one that
Mhm.
gets the questions from my parents, like, have you talked to you, Orlando, Ricardo, Eduardo? What are they? I'm just like, call them. I don't know.
Yes.
So they might say something similar to what you said about not getting a response. I'm not sure. Do
Mhm.
you find
Interesting.
is there a difference between your sons and
Mm.
daughters in that perspective?
A little bit, but I mostly equate it to personality styles than
Uh,
anything else. And so, and really do try to, and I'm going to throw our daughter-in-law into this mix too, who we
sure.
consider one of ours now too, right? Like, they're just different. They're different people,
Yeah.
and different people communicate differently. And
Yeah, have different needs.
um, they do. They need different things. And
Yeah.
so, and I will say, like, during that transition of like the years where I felt like I was clinging on to these adults who were like,
Mm,
trying to spread their wings, going through navigating that transition, um, really what I found was like, yeah, yes, I am still a parent. And what that looks like for me now is, ways that I can still be supportive.
mm,
And, our youngest son and his wife have two children, one just turned 4, the other one's 1 and almost 1.5, 15, 16 months. They're pretty open to our help right now. Like, and we try to offer it as much as possible. Um, but I do know that, for some of our kids, their friends, their parents are in a place of needing things from their kids, needing their kids to
yeah.
support them and
Yeah.
instead of the other way
Yeah.
around. And for me, I just keep saying, look, I might need that from you someday. That
Mm,
day's not here yet. Right
okay.
now, it's still about us being of service
Okay.
to you. And there might come a time in the future. I know that that time is here, for instance, with my mother and,
Mm,
a wildly independent person who in the last
yeah.
few years has found and thankfully through lots of conversations that she and I've had together of like, it's not only okay to ask for help, this is the time of life where,
Yeah.
you get to rely on us. You gave us so much. Now let us give
Mm,
back to you.
mm.
But I hopefully am a couple decades away from that, from that. And so, maybe not like health, life,
Who
things
knows?
can happen, but that this stage of parenting, this season of parenting, I hear that term used a lot, the season of
Mm,
life, at least for Brian and I, is about being of service to our kids
being
and
of service.
not our kids feeling like they need to be of service to us.
Yet. If ever.
Yet,
Yet.
again, there may come a time.
I mean, so Connie, as you're talking about all these different elements and areas of life and how you build these relationships and your just level of self-awareness and mindfulness about how to approach these different scenarios in life. I'd love, I think, for this part of the conversation to like go beyond, like behind the veil, so to speak. How did you become so wise? Like
Oh.
what kind of work? Yeah, because like, I don't
Yeah.
I know it takes something for us to have the quality of conversations that we have,
Yes.
for you to have that hands-off approach when needed,
Mhm.
to be really conscious about, hey, this is maybe not what I need or what they need. And
Yes.
all of those elements, like let's go beyond those
Yeah.
circumstances and see what did you have to do to develop that? Because I know you've done a
Yeah.
lot of personal
Mhm.
growth too.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the truth is it came out of some very painful experiences in my life. Going through a divorce was extraordinarily painful. It for me, at those times in my life where I'm going through something painful, I have gained so much wisdom and insight out of it,
Yeah.
right? Those painful situations for me, I don't want to say that this is true for everyone, but for me, they are a call for healing, right? That's a course in miracles, right? Anything
Yeah.
unlike love, is a call for love itself. And
Mm,
so, just recognizing that, um, it is a time for me to learn something. Oh gosh, I've been really blessed by so many influencers in my life.
mhm.
Someone in my life 30 years ago, at least 30 years ago, um, who said, pain is an opportunity to make your ears grow. And when I asked him what that meant, he's like, that's when you need to listen to God, right? So
Uh,
this
yeah.
idea that, okay, you're in pain, what is it that God, the universe, whatever your spiritual inclination is, life, if there isn't a spiritual inclination, as
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to, impose a spiritual component for someone who, may not have that
Sure.
leaning. But what is it that life is offering to teach me right now?
Yeah.
What is it, that I need to surrender,
Yeah.
and let go of and
Mm,
allow life to bring in? And so, honestly, any of the things that you're experiencing as wise or mindful, those all came out of extremely painful seasons
yeah.
of my life, where thankfully I was willing to experience those times as an opportunity for growth. Some
Yeah.
people don't, right? Like, so bitterness sets in, and all of the things that set in when healing doesn't take place.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, um, my being on the planet, I just was able to, at a pretty young age, I really feel like in my mid to late 20s is when I've had some of my
Mm,
most down on my knees, whoa, earth
mm,
shattering times of my life.
yeah.
And, thankfully, I was able to um, navigate and walk through those times with a mindset of learning and growing and
Yeah.
finding peace in my heart around whatever the painful situation was.
I like how you put that, the idea that pain can usher us to growth, right? When we're
Mhm.
focused on the healing of the pain.
Yeah.
And you're right, not everybody, I know I work as a coach and not everybody is wanting to look at the pain or to
Mhm.
they cover the pain or they have other behaviors to mask the pain. There's all sorts of other ways to manage, right? But I think for those that are willing to look at the pain and to not dwell in it, not to luxuriate in
Yeah.
it necessarily, but to use it as information, as data of an
Yes.
area that needs attention or an area that needs to be
Hmm.
explored a bit. I know I've felt the same way, and I think part of you mentioned you're a learner, and so am I. I always feel like pain gives me an opportunity to learn something about
Hmm.
myself. And what that usually looks like is I notice if I'm feeling irritated or frustrated about something and it's
Hmm.
not going away. It could be that
Hmm.
light, right? I found lately in some conversations with people that I care deeply about, if the conversations annoy me in some way, shape, or form, there's something I'm frustrated by,
Hmm.
uh, and I start to ask questions about it, and I don't feel satisfied with the responses I'm getting, is usually a place for me to start looking. I'm like, why am I so frustrated about this?
Hmm.
In fact,
Hmm.
I haven't shared this with you yet, but I just created this I had a conversation that brought up some of those frustrations. It was about the political landscape in this country, which
Hmm.
is fraught with
Mm.
all sorts of juicy
Ugh.
differences of opinion. And I remember getting that and kind of feeling irritated and annoyed about it. It was with a family member. And as I was thinking about it afterwards, I'm like, what was it? What was it that I was so upset about or so frustrated by? And I realized that I value connection so much,
Mm,
so much
mhm.
that I started a podcast to talk about it,
Yes.
and I'm writing a book about it and I talk
Yep.
and teach about it. But I value it so highly that I realized that the conversation and the way the conversation was going was was a place where there was a lack of connection, or I could see a sense, a bit of separation. And
Hmm.
my way of dealing when I felt that way was like, okay, let me see if I can go deeper in this
Yeah.
conversation. And it wasn't quite getting there. So I created this tool, and I'll share it sometime on social media. I'm sure that you know how they talk about the iceberg, and that an
Yes.
iceberg, the majority of the iceberg is actually below the surface of the water.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what I basically came up with was this little tool. It's going to be like a little card or size thing, or maybe an Instagram post where it shows this iceberg that on the surface, the iceberg is all about, look, I saw this on the news, or I heard somebody say, and the opinions that I have about it. That's
Hmm.
like the surface conversation. And what I started to notice is when the conversation is just surrounding that element, that's where I started to feel like, I'm separating. I don't feel connected to
Hmm.
you anymore. And
Yeah.
I need this conversation. I need this person's connection. I need the connection with this person,
Yeah.
family, close friend, right? Somebody meaningful. And so then below the surface is feelings, beliefs, ideas, thoughts that are personal to you. So I saw this thing, but you know what that means to me? This is why I feel this way about it, not because of what I heard, but this is what it means. And then below that is the values that are connected to
Mm.
those beliefs or those feelings. And so basically every layer has a series of questions, a couple simple
Hmm.
questions for each. And the idea is that we can, in my case, I can learn and learn and practice wisdom at any level. So I'm not just saying, oh no, we can't talk about superficial things. Like I only want to go deep. That's not true. And I think that if I can find a way to heal the pain that I feel
Yes.
when I notice it, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that means I need to go deeper, deeper within myself, or
Hmm.
deeper in the conversation with the other. So I'm
Hmm.
gonna pause there and see. I'd love to hear your thoughts, reactions, insights, anything.
I love it. I'm looking forward to getting that chart from
Okay.
you. I'm like already like, ooh, I can see how that could facilitate X conversation here and
Yeah,
Y conversation there. And I'm looking forward to seeing that tool not only for myself personally to be able to use, but also to reflect with you on, the
cool.
celebration of what you've developed and how it can be
Thanks.
used.
No, I will definitely share that. But yeah, I think this idea of building connection with people,
Hmm.
and noticing where pain exists and healing
Yeah,
it. And because you've already mentioned a couple of resources, you mentioned the
yeah.
book about courage, and you also mentioned A Course in Miracles. What other tools have you noticed? It's, I think this is for someone to be this intent and this committed to healing, especially
Hmm.
in relationship and connecting with other people. I'd love for the
Yeah.
people who are watching or listening to have some idea of where to even begin to look for that
Yeah.
healing. So can you
Yeah.
share some of these resources?
Yeah. I mean, I would say two, so many now. I was going to say one, then two, then three. A more recent person who I see as a huge resource and one of my circle of influencers, not in person because I don't know her in
Yeah.
person, but Brene Brown's work is really impactful. I use her book Dare to Lead regularly in
Mm,
working with schools and leaders. Now I used it myself as a leader. One of her early books was The Gifts of Imperfection,
yeah. Read that.
incredibly profound, for those of us who are recovering perfectionists on this planet,
Mhm.
and just in recognizing, a lot of those same tenets, right? Like, that often perfectionism is, covering up. Brene Brown is a researcher. I know,
Yeah.
for anyone in the audience who might not. And her early research was all on shame. And
Yeah.
so, um, I shouldn't say all on, was predominantly on shame. And
That's
so,
what she
you
was
know,
known
she's
for.
written just prolifically
Yeah.
about not only shame, but then how to transform, the tools that, she develops through working with shame into other areas of your life. I understand she has a new book out. A colleague just told me about it. I
The
don't remember the
Atlas of the
title.
Heart or something like that. Is
Oh,
that the one?
yes, that is
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So, so she's a current one. I will say, like in the early days, those
Mhm.
early years of deep pain, Marianne Williamson, just any book she wrote, I just gobbled it up. I would say, I do have a religious upbringing. I was raised Catholic. I spent most of my 20s trying to find my place in the world of spirituality and
Yeah.
religion, and thankfully found the Unity movement in my 30s. And, that has been a huge part of, who I've become and how I see the world. And Marianne Williamson, was a key
Mhm.
component in that transition. So, of course, the Course in Miracles work. But today I like things too. Like I read Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed recently, and Thich Nhat Hanh's words, tend to really resonate with me. Pema Chodron. So these are Buddhist,
Yeah.
spiritual leaders. I have Pema Chodron has a book on peace, and I have the mini version of it that I keep in my little bag.
Oh.
When I'm standing in line somewhere, instead of whipping out my phone and looking at something, I pull out, and I'll reread something that I've read a dozen times and still get something more out of it. It's like
Mm.
she's that profound and layered, and it's just it's those kinds of topics that I benefit from
Yeah.
regular reminders of.
Yeah.
Um, so those
What
are
is that book
probably the
again? It was a
um,
book on peace.
practicing peace, maybe. I think I'm going to
Yeah.
have to send you the list of books, and
Yeah,
maybe they can
perfect.
be
I'll
a,
add it to the show notes so that way people can
yes,
explore them.
that would be great because I came unprepared with titles
No, no worries,
today.
no worries. That's fine.
And those details don't come to my wise woman mind like they used to. So,
It's all good. We can go back and refer to it later.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, big fan. Dalai Lama and his writings, and those are all what I would consider inspirational leaders
Mm-hmm.
in my life. And often, when I need an answer to something, I'll,
Yeah.
search. Louise Hay, you've shared with
Yeah,
me.
Louise
I've been a follower of Louise Hay since my early days in Unity. And about a year ago, you shared all the affirmation cards in one PDF for me. I was like,
Yeah.
ah. And at that time, was really navigating something very challenging, with my family that you know of, that you're aware of. And boy, the first card I pulled out, like, yeah, that was exactly, like family is, perfect just the way they
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
like take all the judgment off of it. This is we're all just being people here and going through
Yes.
a difficult moment. So I do really benefit from,
Yeah.
not people that I can sit down and have a conversation with necessarily, although I do often feel like I'm conversing through their writing.
Mm. Yeah, I think any of these resources, we don't necessarily, you and I don't necessarily talk about all of these, but they do
Hmm.
influence so much of our conversation. I think to give
Hmm.
us some concepts or some grounding or perspective that we can then practice out in the world, or we can
Hmm.
then try on for size and chat about or talk, about, hey, some chapter or some
Yes.
idea. It's so meaningful. Yeah,
Hmm.
I want to, it's funny when you were talking about all the pain that you experienced in your 20s, like I would say like between my 30s and my 40s, like early 30s, early 40s, that span, that 10-year-ish span
Yeah.
was really like, whoa, very, very,
Yeah.
all the trials. Of course, I had
Hmm.
childhood stuff, kind of
Yeah.
woven in there for just for flavoring,
Hmm.
spicing things up, but but I think the pain that I was most conscious on working through, also from a divorce and
Hmm.
all these other
Yep.
areas of my career that I was kind of working through, that was a period of time that was really rife
Hmm.
with opportunity for
Yes.
growth. When you
Yeah.
look at your life now and you see, maybe you're saying a couple of decades from now, right? Thinking about
Hmm.
your children and how that relationship might shift, but you're
Hmm.
thinking future, Connie. What are areas that you want to really devote your time and energy to now?
Mm, mm, That is an interesting question. Um, honestly, just exactly what I'm doing, we've talked before about like this season of life that we're in. My husband retired a couple years ago. I always knew when he retired that I would retire from school leadership and, kind of venture off into like, I don't feel ready to be done with, whatever it is that I'm doing, career wise or,
Wait, no, no,
professional
no.
development
No,
wise.
you can't say whatever it is that you're doing. You're doing something very specific. It's not like you're just moonlighting and freelancing
No, that's
here.
true. Like
So,
I was inspired very early on to, that I knew I would start my own business when Brian retired, and that, I would that business would be centered around supporting people in the Montessori community. And that's been a lovely transition for me. Um, it is grounded in helping people. I do feel, here's another book for you. There's a book called The How of Happiness, The How To of Happiness. Again, I'll
okay,
get you the exact title. I read it
okay,
a couple years ago. Loved it. It has all these checklists that you go through, and the kind of the gist of it is happiness looks different for everybody. And it
yeah,
isn't about the physical things in your
yeah.
life, it's about the being in your life. And
Mm,
for me, hands down, service to others, was
yeah.
my happy track. And
Mm,
and I've known that for a while. Like, many years ago, my husband and I did the love language work, and
yeah,
mine was off the charts acts of service, So um, so I see, while I might not be actively facilitating my consulting business in 20 years, I do see that being of service to others, that until I
part of
am
it.
no longer able to do that in whatever capacity, it might not, I might not be able to physically be of service to others, but
Okay.
perhaps I can be of service just by being present for
Mm,
somebody. But that's a happy life for me. Being of service
yeah.
to others is a happy life. And
Mm,
anytime I find myself, in my career in school leadership in particular, that could be a very full
yeah.
schedule. And, in some of those seasons when I didn't feel like I really had the time to be of service to others, I didn't feel as happy as I do,
Interesting.
when I can be. And I want to be really clear, for any of your listeners, that's what happiness is for me.
For
I'm not
you.
saying it's
Yep.
what happiness is for everybody. And
Mm,
so, finding out what brings joy to your soul, and joy
yeah.
is, the center point of your work, when,
Hmm.
and I feel like that's our quest on this planet, is
Yeah.
to find what brings us joy. And when you find it, do it.
Do it. Mm,
And there may be people in the world who will suggest that that's not the path you should take and do it anyway,
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be do it anyway in a like, a mean or disconnected kind of way. It can be like, yes, thank you so much for your feedback and do it anyway,
Yes.
So,
As Wayne Dyer says, to be independent of the good opinion of others.
oh, that is a great phrase. Such a good
Yeah,
reminder.
be
Yes.
independent of the good opinion of others.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
yeah, to bring joy. It reminds me, and I'll add this book too. And I can't remember the name of the book, but the author is Ilchi Lee.
Hmm.
And he has um, Korean background and has a background in a lot of energy work. And so one of the things he talks about is like the first half of life is often focused on success and finding success
Hmm.
through our achievements. And he
Hmm.
says the latter half of life is focused on fulfillment. Right. And so finding ways to feel fulfilled with whatever it is we're doing,
Hmm.
whether we're continuing to work, whether that's focus on our family, focus on our well-being, any of those things. And so I find that really captivating that,
Yes.
if we can have a moment to identify that shift or integrate the two. I don't think they have to be necessarily independent of each
Yes.
other. So
Mhm.
such good stuff. Any final words here, Connie? Have any advice or wisdom
Hmm.
that you want to share to the listeners, to me, to
Yeah.
anybody?
Yeah, I just love you so much and love our relationship. So, like, the first thing that comes to mind is find your person or your people, whoever they are, the people who you come alive with when you're
Yeah.
with them. One of for your listeners, we geographically don't live in the same place anymore. So, for the last
Hmm.
couple of years, we've connected almost solely through Zoom.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting on the days that we do. I'll come out of my office, my husband will be like, "You were really having fun in that meeting." I'm like, "Oh, it wasn't a meeting. It was my time with
It's
Valerie."
Valerie.
Oh, like, and what that means to me when I hear him say that is he hears me come alive in a way
Mm,
when we're connecting
mm.
that, it doesn't mean I'm not alive in the rest of
Sure.
my life, but, so
Yeah.
that that brings a level of fulfillment that to me is
Mm,
undescribable. Like, I can't give anybody words for what to look for other than you'll know it when you
yes.
find it. And
Yes.
when you find it, then be intentional about it. And
There
maybe
you go.
that's part of why we are so intentional about our relationship,
Yes.
because it holds, at least for me, it holds that level of
Yeah.
meaning.
Ditto everything you said, except for Brian asking me about my glow. That does not happen. He doesn't ask me, and Ahmad doesn't ask either. But you're right. I think part of the way we know is if we feel a sense of either peace, or we feel excited, or
Mhm.
we feel
Mhm.
hopeful.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been a single conversation, and I mean to say this after 10 years of intentional
Yes.
connection, conversation, there's not been a single conversation that you and I have had where I've walked away depleted in some way.
Agreed.
When I
Same.
felt down or irritated or disappointed or
Yes.
anything. If nothing else, if I didn't feel high, I definitely felt, I don't know,
Even.
balanced,
Yes.
balanced and grounded, right? There's something
Yes.
about the way in which we connect with each other and the way we challenge each
Hmm.
other and the way we pour into each other and share so generously.
Yes.
I
Yes.
never
Agreed.
feel like I have to be careful about, oh, I can't share this part of my life. I don't want to make her
Hmm.
jealous. Or I don't feel like you
Hmm.
have any gatekeeping, gatekeeping any
Nope.
secrets. Or have been so open. Like you said, emotional
Yes.
and psychological safety are
Yes.
definitely the two things that we prioritize in our conversations. And it has
Hmm.
absolutely paid off, in the
Yes.
ways that matter.
Agreed.
It's just a sense of peace
Agreed.
and fulfillment.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to you. I love
Me
you. I love
too.
our friendship and our conversations. May they be abounding for another decade. Who knows
Agreed.
what the universe has in store for us? But if nothing else,
Hmm.
for us to also inspire other people to find the same. That
Yes.
those to surround ourselves intentionally with conversations that help us thrive and grow, as I mentioned
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah. Lift us up. Find
Yes.
people and situations that lift you up. And when you find them, keep going back to them. Make
Yes.
them a part of your life.
Absolutely. That's the muscle.
Yes.
Ah, oh, my
Agreed.
dear friend, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing all your lovely wisdom. Like I mentioned, I will take all the resources that you want to provide. I'll make a nice
Hmm.
little list, and it'll
Great.
be linked in the show notes so that people can have access to that too. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank
And
you for the opportunity. I
my
appreciate it. And I
pleasure.
appreciate you.
Yes. And this is your second podcast with me. You are
It
also a not
is.
quite
Yes.
stranger, so you're a
You
vet.
you tell me I'm a veteran. Yes. So I can't wait
Ah,
for what your next podcasts
who
will be
knows? There
about.
might there might be more coming. Yes. Thank you so much, Connie.
Yeah,
Those of
you
you
as
who
well.
tuned in to this episode,
Hmm.
thank you all also for tuning in, for listening. Hopefully, this conversation has sparked something. If you have someone out there who you think might be the person to connect to,
Hmm.
send them a note. They may not respond, and that's okay. Just let them know you're thinking about them, and there's a potential
Hmm.
there to develop an ongoing connection. So thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Circle of Hope. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share with someone in your circle. And if you're curious about the upcoming book, visit valeriehope.com for updates and extras. Until then, Stay connected.